Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as a body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing the behavior and body language of Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar is a physicist who claims he worked with the U.S. government to reverse engineer alien technology. Before we get into all of these controversial claims, a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to make sure you know this is not a psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. In addition to that, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. So if you're wondering why I'm analyzing what appears to be an old video rather than his Joe Rogan interview, it's because I want to go back to the source. I want to go back to older interviews because after somebody has said something over and over and over again, it becomes easier to lie about it. So I'm going back to a 1989 interview when it's closer to when these claims were newer. Hopefully that will give us a better baseline for whether or not he's telling the truth. Okay, let's just jump right in.
Witness any disc technology at Area 51?
No, there was absolutely no ET craft, ET technology, anything like that at Area 51. This is why S4 was made specifically to separate it there. People at Area 51 do not have the clearance.
All right, one of the things you're noticing already, he speaks very clearly and concisely. This is something that he also does when he was on his Joe Rogan interview. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't have to think much about what he's talking about. He just says it clearly. That is always a good sign when it comes to somebody who's telling the truth. Now, that doesn't mean somebody can't tell the truth that's also saying ums and ahs and looking around and trying to think, but he's not showing any signs of anxiety or nervousness. That's one of the things that I'm going to be looking very, very closely for. Because when people lie, particularly have big lies, particularly when they have big lies on camera, they really do struggle not to let that leak out. Let's watch this part again. Let's see if there's anything else.
Witness any disc technology at Area 51?
No, there was absolutely no ET craft, ET technology, anything.
All right, so you see him saying there was no ET technology, no craft, so on and so forth. As he shakes his head when he's talking, this is actually very consequential. Because when we're feeling something deeply, our body's connected to what we're feeling. So when we say no, and we shake our head while we're saying no, that's far more likely than someone who says no and then shakes it afterward. Now, I watch a lot of trials, and it is very clear when somebody says no and then does it afterward, it's a performance because you realize, okay, I need to show people that I don't believe this. So they shake their head no after they say it. He's doing it in sequence. It's synchronous with what he's thinking and feeling, which lends more credence to the idea that what he says is something he believes.
Anything like that at Area 51. This is why S4 was made specifically to separate it there. People at Area 51 do not have the clearance.
How long were you employed at S4, and when were you hired?
When was I hired at S4? I guess...
All right, now, when he was first asked that question, watch his mouth right here.
How long were you employed at S4, and when were you hired?
All right, you saw that lip licking. Now, there's lots of nerves in the lips. So when we're going to say something that makes us anxious, we tend to lick our lips. So that's why I'm saying when we're looking for lies, we look for things like that. That doesn't mean what he's getting ready to say is a lie. It could just mean that he feels something strongly about it. But typically that is because you are feeling strongly. Could be because the question makes him anxious. But we're going to look to see if there are patterns. We're not going to make any major conclusions based off one behavior.
When was I hired at S4? I guess early '89. And I was probably there only about 6 months or so, on a very infrequent basis.
How were you transported to and from work?
At the time that I was working there at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, there was a Special Projects EG&G building. When I was told to go to work, I drove there, parked my car there, and got it.
So one thing that he's doing right now, he's providing a lot of detail. Now, it's not that liars can't provide lots of details. If you watch someone like John Wayne Gacy, he provides tons of details about things, but he's also one of the world's worst psychopaths. So it's easy for him to lie. Oftentimes when people lie about things like this, they don't provide this level of detail because they don't want anybody to be able to verify whether what they're saying is true.
Around the opposite end of the hangars, there's the standard entrance where you're dropped off at. Go through a security check, and inside there's a small complex. There is some office space. There are several laboratories, the hangars.
Something else you're probably noticing is that his body is quite open. So when we're feeling vulnerable, we allow ourselves to leave our chest open, to leave our body open. When we're feeling defensive, we tend to close all of that off. Right now, we're not seeing any shifts. We're not seeing him start to close off. Because oftentimes when someone's lying, particularly when bigger lies are going to happen, then we see them shift. Then we see them close themselves off. Or we see them leaning away from the interviewer. Things like that. We're not really seeing any changes right now.
Themselves, of course. And a few other places. I didn't have free reign to go wherever I wanted to. Everywhere I went to, I was essentially escorted, so that was really all about that I saw.
Inside the facility, what was the basic layout? Were there underground levels?
I don't think there were any underground levels to it, though there could have been.
All right, now you see his eyebrows right here. Watch this.
I don't think there were any underground levels to it, though there could have.
So he's saying, I don't think there were any underground levels, but there could have been. Raises his eyebrows. Now, when we raise our eyebrows, that means we want people to focus on our face. So as he's saying, I don't think there were any other levels to it, he wants you to hear that. He wants you to look at him while he's saying that. Now, sometimes when people lie, they stop raising their eyebrows because they actually don't want you to look at their face. They want you to look through them. They want you to look past them because they don't want to get caught in a lie. So his body language at this point continues to be one of someone who appears to be telling the truth, interestingly enough.
I don't think there were any underground levels to it, though there could have been. I don't think it would.
So you saw his hands go up right there, and that's for emphasis. And when people lie, particularly about these kinds of details, they tend not to emphasize. They tend to respond, but to try to hide. Now, he is sitting fairly still. That's probably because of the type of interview this is. You're not going to move around like you will on a podcast. So we can't read his body language as much in that way, because sometimes when people are talking and they're moving and then they start lying, they'll become more still because our fight or flight kicks in and we want people to not see us. But right now, his body language continues to be that of someone who appears to be telling the truth.
To really surmise how long it had been operational, everything did look fairly new. By that I mean I don't think this installation was there in the early 70s. Nothing was worn. Things look fairly freshly painted. So
now, something you may have noticed is that his mouth seems to twitch some when he's talking. So it's almost like it's twitching in the direction of a smile. This would be more meaningful if it was twitching downward, like fear or surprise or shock. Those kinds of mouth movements would be more concerning because when we feel fear or when we're feeling intense fear, our mouth goes down like that. Sometimes you'll see people's faces flash like that when they're talking about something that's making them anxious. We're not seeing fear right now. The mouth twitches are not, I noticed them, but they're not incredibly material in terms of what he's saying.
This installation was there in the early 70s. Nothing was worn. Things look fairly freshly painted. So, you know, as a ballpark guess, I would say it would really surprise me if the installation was older than 5, 7, 10 years, something like that. And the device exploded, killing both of them. The scientists that were killed there, allegedly the detonation from the explosion was fairly large. It would have rivaled a small tactical nuke. So it was done at the Nevada test.
Once again, he is providing a lot of detail about these things, and he doesn't have to stop, think, process it all. Now, it's always possible that if what he's saying was not true, that he'd come up with a very elaborate and very consistent story that he would have had to have thought about over and over and over again. But the way that he's saying this, he is stating these similarly to someone who is retrieving facts or things that they know. So it's very interesting. The way he presents is very consistent with, once again, somebody telling the truth, which is shocking to me.
Tell us about the briefing files. Under what conditions did you gain access to them?
I was put into the briefing room with 121 or 22 briefings and really was just told to sit and read through them. I think...
Now, this is interesting. I want you to watch the corner of his mouth right here.
Really was just told to sit and read through them.
See the corner of his mouth? We oftentimes associate that with contempt. So if this, in fact, is something that's true, being asked to sit and read through them seems like something that he didn't enjoy doing. That's what this would suggest. So it does seem that what he's talking about is evoking actual emotion, which is interesting. Because once again, when people lie, it's very hard to tap into real, genuine emotions. You're mainly just trying to not get caught. So the idea that you're lying so well that you're having fake memories and you're reacting to those it's not impossible, but very, very challenging to do.
Briefings and really was just told to sit and read through them. 2 stars of a binary star system. The craft allegedly came from there. 1 or 2 autopsy photographs I saw.
Now that was the flash of fear I was talking about. And let's go back and watch this, and I'm going to explain what we're seeing and why we might be seeing it.
They came from there. 1 or 2 autopsy photographs I saw.
You see that look right there? The mouth moving down? That's what I'm referring to when I talk about fear. So when somebody's talking about autopsy photographs that they saw, this is actually an appropriate reaction. So it's surprising, once again, his body language continues to be very consistent with what he's saying. What fascinates me so much about this is that if what he's saying is not true, if it is just some sort of elaborate lie, he is probably the best liar that I have seen, or at least one of the best liars I've seen, if in fact he's not telling the truth. Really, really fascinating stuff to me.
The craft allegedly came from there. One or two autopsy photographs I saw dealt with just a small photograph, a bust shot, essentially, just head.
Now, something I want to distinguish very briefly, because I do think this is important, is showing fear because you are lying versus showing fear because you're reacting to something you're remembering. Because both are important. The context is hugely consequential when it comes to interpreting this stuff. So I want you to think about it like this. Let's just say you just told a huge lie and you're feeling anxious about it. So you got to touch your face, close yourself off, make yourself feel calm again, right? Because I just lied, therefore I need to calm myself down. That's one way. Or you just said something really consequential and you're going to get in trouble, so you show a little bit of fear because you just lied. It's another to have memories of something that's distressing or strange or weird, like what he's talking about, and show some fear there. Because his fear was before what he was really about to say, or was in the midst of it. Oftentimes, if we're going to see fear from a lie, we see it afterward. So once again, really a fascinating interview.
Dealt with just a small photograph, a bust shot, essentially, just head, shoulders, and chest of an alien with a chest was cut open in a T fashion and one single organ was removed. The organ itself in the other picture was cut and vivisectioned, essentially. Showing the different chambers in there. This was totally unrelated to anything I was doing.
Now you see him shaking his head like this. Now sometimes that can mean that you're saying no as you're talking. We do see that sometimes, but it's different typically. Usually it will be if somebody asks a question and they're saying yes and doing this, then we'll know the way they feel is actually quite the opposite of what they're saying. Oftentimes people also shake their head for emphasis. This is, at least in this context, seems to be more emphasis than disagreeing with himself.
And allegedly what happened in '79, there was some sort of information exchange going on where there were actual live aliens at the facility, and at one particular point,
let's watch his mouth again right there.
There was some sort of information exchange going on where there were actual live aliens at the facility, and
you saw the mouth twitch again. After he said live aliens at the facility, there was the twitch of fear. And that's less common than people trying to soothe themselves after telling a lie. So once again, there was this undercurrent of fear when he's talking about this, which is
an exchange going on where there were actual live aliens at the facility.
You see that little twitch? Watch one last time. I know this is really hard to see, but I want you to watch right down here.
Information exchange going on where there were actual live aliens at the facility. And
see, think about this. If you feel extreme fear, if somebody startles you, you know, your eyes go up, your mouth goes down like that. It's like surprise and fear in the same time. So right here, what we're seeing is, even though he's very plain-faced about a lot of this, there are emotions under the surface, which lends credence to what he's saying.
One particular point, there was an area where some security personnel went to enter. And apparently, because of not the sidearms, but the bullets in the sidearms, from what I understand, if they would have entered the area, the bullets would have detonated. And supposedly one of the creatures tried to stop the security personnel from entering the area, and a fight ensued. And the bottom line from the altercation was that the security personnel, I don't remember how many were involved, but were all killed, and they died of head wounds, and that's all that I heard of that story.
So as he provides details, because I've worked with a lot of liars, I've worked with a lot of criminals, as he's providing details about this, the way that he's providing details, the balance of what he does know versus what he doesn't, it goes back to the idea that if he's in fact lying, he's really just he would be a remarkably good liar, because this is all very consistent with someone in terms of how they actually recall information and how they provide information when they're talking about something they've actually experienced or been through.
The security personnel, I don't remember how many were involved, but were all killed, and they died of head wounds, and that's all that's above Q clearance. And Q clearance is the civilian top secret clearance.
When did you see your first disc?
The first disc I saw,
Now watch his neck right here.
and Q clearance is the civilian top secret clearance.
When did you see your first disc?
He said, when did you see your first disc? You saw a big swallow after that. So that implies that this question, either that or talking about Q clearance beforehand, something is making him feel strongly about this when he's responding to this question.
When did you realize the craft was not of earthly origin?
Well, it probably really hit me when I got inside the craft and looked around and began to understand how the craft was operated and finally grasped the whole project as a whole.
See, the more he's talking about it, the more emphasis you see. He is someone who has subtle movements. He's not somebody who's very explosive or has a lot of energy. But when he's talking about something and then all of a sudden he starts opening up, the more he's talking about having been in a craft, the more you're seeing his hands open up, the more he's actually moving his head. So it's sort of the opposite of what we would expect, because when people are lying, the longer they lie, the more uncomfortable they get. We're seeing the opposite here. The more he talks about it, the more comfortable he appears. Very interesting.
The craft was operated and finally grasped the whole project as a whole, as what we were doing, the fact that we weren't building this thing, we were trying to find out how it was made. We were back engineering it. As far as emotionally, people have asserted that, boy, that must have been the most exciting time in your life, and that's not the way it was. When I first got to look inside the craft, all I can say, it's an ominous feeling. You walk in there and it feels as if you shouldn't be there. I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's real ominous.
Now, his body language, once again, is consistent with what he's saying. Watch his chin.
It feels as if you should.
It feels as if you shouldn't be in there. His chin immediately went down. Now, our neck is very vulnerable. So when we're feeling defensive, sometimes our chins go down. If you watch a criminal who's talking about whether or not they committed a murder or something like that, when they're having to respond to questions like that, sometimes you see their chins tucked down, you see them block their neck. I know I refer to a lot of forensic stuff because I watch a lot of trials, but that's where you can see these behaviors in clear as day. If you want examples of these things and you want to see it in real time, trials are a great way to do it, because you can verify whether or not somebody was lying and you can compare that with the body language. But as you see, his chin tucks down, he's blocking his neck. This is something that actually makes him feel concerned, lends more credence to what he's saying being true. And I know I've said that a number of times because I'm still shocked I'm saying it, frankly, because what he's saying is so consistent with his body language.
You walk in there and it feels as if you shouldn't be there. I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's real.
And then he moved his neck back up as he's talking about it. And that, when somebody's performing, they tend to overdo things. When people have these little micro expressions or small behaviors that they don't realize they're doing, they tend to be quick or they tend to be small, which is exactly what we're seeing.
Ominous feeling. It's not an exciting feeling. It brings up a whole lot of questions in your mind. Well, where did this come from? And you know that they won't give you the answers to the whole story, but it's that's the only way I can describe it.
And this goes back to what he was saying before, when he was talking about pictures that he saw, when he was talking about various experiences. I talked about that fear. This is consistent with that. This is not fun or exciting to him. There are things about this that are scary, that feel ominous, that feel dark. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and stop, because I think we've got enough from this interview to come to some conclusions. So let's talk about some of what we didn't see. What we didn't see were things like him flaring his nostrils to take in more oxygen. Now, that's a subtle thing that I look for during interviews like this, because when people are feeling anxious or when they're asked something and they're having to tell a really big lie, you can see them trying to subtly take in more breath because their heart beats faster, it uses up more oxygen, makes us anxious. So there's subtle things like that. He didn't do anything like that. He remained remarkably calm throughout. There were a couple of points when he seemed anxious, but it was consistent with what he was talking about. It didn't seem like pacifying behaviors, and that's what we look for when people are lying. We look for them to pacify themselves. So let's talk a bit about the conclusions I've come to. If Bob Lazar is not telling the truth as he sees it, then he is probably the best liar that I have ever seen. John Wayne Gacy, someone I referred to earlier, a famous serial killer, he was a tremendously good liar, probably the best liar of all of those types, of all the serial killers from those days, but there were still things that would leak out. I've done videos on him where you can still see when he's lying. Sometimes he covers it up pretty well, but there's still emotional leakage. So is Bob Lazar somehow capable of suppressing emotions in ways that almost nobody else is? I suppose it's possible. I can't verify that what he's saying is true. And frankly, this is not something that I know much about. I don't know much about all the conspiracy claims and aliens and all of this stuff. This isn't an area that I explore very often, but I didn't identify any lies. There's also the alternative that I'm sure people are going to ask is the man just crazy? Is this somebody who's delusional and believes these things, but he's really out of his mind? That seems like a very, very unlikely explanation for this, because I've worked with a lot of people with severe and persistent mental illness, and they don't present like this. And they certainly don't present like this consistently over years, over different interviews, because I have watched some other interviews that he's done, and he is remarkably consistent. So the idea that he's just mentally ill and believes all the things he's saying seems to be the least likely explanation out of all of these, actually. So shockingly, no lies were detected. That being said, if there are other Bob Lazar interviews you want me to check out, or there's other things you want me to analyze, let me know. I'm happy to watch whatever. And if people enjoy this, I will analyze anybody that you want. If there are other people in this same area that are covering the same subject that you want me to take a look at, I'm happy to do that as well. If you have any other thoughts, please let me know in the comments below. If you have any of those ideas, I also want to hear about those. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.